Today we will talk about a road known as a legend in Vietnam, the Ho Chi Minh Trail. However, not everyone knows that within this legend lies another legendary path that engineers from China, Russia, or the United States would marvel at upon seeing. It is the petroleum pipeline along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a route that American generals could never have anticipated, leading them to exclaim, "Vietnam's petroleum pipeline is a true legend." From 1968 to 1974, the Vietnamese military managed to build a petroleum pipeline totaling 5,000 kilometers, making it the longest pipeline in the world at that time. It took China another 15 years to build a longer one. Thanks to this pipeline, vehicles could get fuel to transport goods into the battlefield, and tanks and airplanes could fight to liberate the South and unify the country. It was so crucial that the logistics department's leadership once said, "If we had to gild it to make our comrades able to build this pipeline, we would not hesitate." So why is this road called a legend? It's because Vietnam had to construct it with such meticulous effort. Everyone knows the United States as the forefather of the oil industry and the nation that abandoned the gold standard to establish the oil standard. Therefore, more than anyone, the United States understands how important petroleum is for any country. Vietnam's question was how to supply gasoline for vehicles to carry food supplies, for airplanes to fly, and for tanks to get fuel for combat. Because of this, in 1968, all vehicles transporting gasoline and oil to support the southern battlefield were heavily attacked, forcing the Vietnamese military to devise all means possible to transport gasoline and oil to the southern battlefield. How to bring gasoline in without being detected by the enemy? Immediately, the plan to put gasoline in plastic bags and carry them in backpacks on foot to the battlefield was implemented. However, this method could not be sustained long-term, as it was not efficient. 200 people carrying but not even filling 2 barrels. Not to mention, many soldiers suffered from gasoline intoxication, lead poisoning, or even died during transportation. This method was not feasible, so Vietnam switched to using 20 oil cans for gasoline or dragging barrels of gasoline across streams. This approach also could not last long, as it took up to 2 weeks to bring in supplies that would only last vehicles for 2 days. Eventually, the Vietnamese military came up with a solution to gather everything that could be called a pipe and connect them into one pipeline, from water pipes to bamboo tubes. This method proved to be quite effective as the Vietnamese military no longer had to exert as much effort. However, after a short time, they could not use it because the bamboo could not withstand the pressure, and after a while, the gasoline leaked out. Trying 100 millimeters might work, but connecting thousands of kilometers would not. During a trip to the Soviet Union, General Vo Nguyen Giap saw their oil transportation method and brought it back to Vietnam to apply. One would think the problem was solved there, but the situation in the Soviet Union and Vietnam was completely different. First, the Soviet Union had an excellent air defense system, while Vietnam did not, facing American bombings. Secondly, those pipelines were only used for short-term campaigns and were dismantled after, whereas the Vietnamese military needed it for a long-term strategy to liberate the South, questioning its long-term usability and maintenance. Third, Vietnam's mountainous terrain was extremely complicated. Generals in that meeting were silent, looking for solutions. But immediately, Lieutenant General Dinh Duc Tien volunteered and promised General Vo Nguyen Giap to research and urgently implement it. The execution problem was even more challenging, as it always had to ensure secrecy. It must be kept secret to proceed. Without secrecy, it was not feasible. This forced Vietnam to conduct intense surveillance, not letting American intelligence detect the pipeline locations. This seemed straightforward, yet Vietnam did it well. But America still managed to bomb the pipeline locations, even those not yet installed. At this point, the Vietnamese military had to solve a much more challenging problem: how to install the pipeline to overcome the highly scientific and meticulous calculations of the Americans. Any pipeline crossing a river had to be submerged to avoid being swept away by floods or destroyed by bombs, importantly remaining undetectable by the enemy. Land pipelines had to be buried deep down by plowing, with farmers continuing to plant rice on the surface as usual. In flat areas, Vietnam's problem was solved. But what about mountainous, steep terrains? Ordinary installation would surely be destroyed by American bombs. But not installing it meant having to place it up high on mountain passes up to 1,000 m high. But at such heights, how could pumps pump oil over? with pressure on the pipes reaching up to 400 atmospheres, risking pipe bursts. Eventually, the Vietnamese military thought of using pumps to gradually pump up in stages little by little, until finally the gasoline and oil could pass over the mountain passes without affecting the pipes. This was considered a Guinness World Record at the time, as no country dared to think, let alone do such a thing. Fortunately, no Guinness World Record confirmed this, because if there were, we would have been exposed. One might think that solving the most challenging problems meant everything was resolved, with gasoline continuously flowing into the battlefield, ensuring the military's peace of mind in combat. However, unfortunately, in 1972, the US returned to bomb Hanoi and Haiphong, preventing Vietnam's gasoline and oil supply from Russia from reaching Haiphong port. This time, Vietnam was forced to install a pipeline to Lang Son to receive supplies from Russia, transported from the port of Phong Cheng in China. That's also why the total length of Vietnam's petroleum pipeline at that time reached 5,000 kilometers, the longest in the world then, making Americans exclaim that Vietnam's petroleum pipeline is a true legend. Thank you for your attention and following from all of you.